see happen in and through North Hill Adventist Fellowship. And it moves them, and they start preaching, and they go out into the squares, and they start preaching, and thousands of people start following Jesus that day. And what Acts chapter 2, 42 through 47 describes is this community that began to be established following this period. And if you open up your Bibles, Acts chapter 2, 42 through 47, and I just want to read through it together so that we can kind of see what we're basing all this off of. And this is what it starts. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together, and they had all things in common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day they were attending the temple together, and they were breaking bread in their homes, and they received their food with glad and generous hearts. They were praising God and having favor with all people, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. And it's really kind of an insane community. Like if you can just imagine being part of that, and the energy and the joy and the completeness that you would feel in that place. I mean, it would be incredible. And if we were to take apart kind of the different actions that we see in that section of Scripture, we kind of came to three different parts. The first thing is they worshiped God. They went to the temple together, they prayed, they praised God. That's all worshiping God. But then they also were in relationship. They were growing in their relationships. They ate together in their homes. They were praying, they were fasting, they were praying, they were praising, and they were studying together. It doesn't say anything about anybody doing it on their own. They were doing it together. And they were also increasing in number. Their community wasn't just like, hey, this is our community, this is for us, and this is what it will always be like. No, actually God was adding people to their community, and they were welcoming them in. And then last, they had servant hearts. They had everything in common. They were sharing everything that they had. They sold everything, put it in a pot, and let it be distributed to anyone who had need. And as we were looking at this passage, we were realizing that the principles of this passage do carry on into today. Maybe God isn't asking you to sell everything that you have and give it to the church so the church can redistribute. Maybe God's not asking you to do that, but what he is asking you to do, and what he already did in Philippians chapter 2, it says that Jesus did not count equality with God something to be grasped. Instead, he took the form of a servant. And so he calls you and I to be servants everywhere we are, just as they were practically doing that by selling everything that they owned. Maybe we don't have to go to the church or to the temple every single day, but God's call on our lives is still to be in community, to be together, because we grow and we see the full facet of who God is. We see all the facets of who God is in community, not just on our own. And so the principles carry on into today. And so this is going to be our focus for the next 12 weeks. We're going to be talking through our mission statement. And so we worship God, we grow in our relationships, and we develop servant hearts. And the first 4 weeks that we're going to be going off of, and what small groups will be based off of, is worship. And that's what we're going to talk about today, worship. And worshiping God is something I'm super excited about talking about. It's been a mind-blowing journey for me. But why don't we pray, and we'll go through this. Lord, thank you so much that you have called us as a church to greater things. Not that the things that came before were less than, but that the things that you have always said, you've always said, I have greater things in store for you in the future. And so we want to chase that. Not to chase the things themselves, but to chase you. And as you work in our community and work in our lives, Lord, we'll see just these incredible things happen around us because you are at work. And it's not us, but us or you through us working in our community. And so, Lord, just guide us as we go through this. Let these words be yours and not mine. And help us to know more about how to worship you. In your name, amen. Back in high school, I went to Christian high school, and so like every Friday night, we had what's called Vespers. We're not going to do that anymore. We had Vespers, and what that was is kind of like music and a sermon type of thing. And I remember there was like 4 different students who were in charge of praise teams. And what that involved is you found people to play instruments and sing, and you chose the songs. And I just remember it being so bad. Because, so you had these 4 different people, and they would find, what it would end up being is you'd be sitting there watching this, and, the instruments are kind of off on the side, the singers are all center stage, but all of the singers are standing like this, like looking at the back screen, just singing songs like "Blessed be the name." That's just what was happening. It was just stiff. I remember there was one team that this girl led, and the stage had 4 steps to get up to the top of the stage, and so she had the singers arranged in what I call the flying V formation, which is 2 people on each step ascending until she, no joke, she is standing at the very top. The queen of the praise team is just standing at the very top, and it was just I got so tired of the monotony, and it was just a lack of passion of worship. It just didn't feel like so my senior year, I got a group of guys together, and I was like, hey, let's start a praise team. And I'm sure that if we went back to that time and saw a video from it, God has given me a voice that's just good enough to lead worship, nothing else. And at that time, it wasn't even that. So realistically, if we went back to that time, it was rough. But we had this desire to lead people in worship. We wanted people to worship. And so that meant that we wanted to choose songs that weren't just like, I just chose a song off a list. I wanted to choose songs intentionally. We wanted to, talk between the songs to make sure that people were worshiping and we're leading our congregation in praise. And after that, I went to college, and another Christian college, and I met this guy named Josh, and he's a super talented guitarist and and singer, and he's way better than I ever will be. And so the 2 of us got together, and we kind of started our own little worship team, and we were playing at some of the smaller worships, like at Fireside, which is just around a fire and stuff like that. And we would just kind of play at some of the stuff. And I remember the day that the chaplain who was in charge of the big college Vespers asked us if we could lead at one of the Vespers. And so we're like, yeah, we'd love to. And then she told us what weekend it was, and it happens to be one of the biggest weekends in the entire year, because we have tournaments where high schools from around the area will come to the college, and so you have 1,000 high school students. And so we ended up leading worship for, I think, 1,800, 2,000 people the first time we ever did it on that kind of stage. And it was really incredible. And we were really excited about it, so we kept kind of building on that. And the next year, I ended up being the one who is now in charge of worships, or Vespers. And so one of the big things that we wanted to focus on was taking the attention off of the stage, off of the people making it a show. So what they would have is it would just be pure white, incandescent light just pouring on the band, right, or whoever was up there. And then everything else was dark, and so it was just there are people up there, and then you're singing and stuff like that, and it just was odd. So one time we decided, hey, let's do something that takes the attention away from us. So I got 300 candles, and we had to get a fire permit, and we put those around, and we had these LED lights that kind of sprayed light up there, but it wasn't on us. And so we played music that way, and we led worship that way. But there was this one weekend, this one Friday night that really sticks out to me. I remember talking to my friend Josh, and I was like, hey, wouldn't it be so cool if we got some people from the choir, and they were wearing the robes, and they stood kind of in the back and sang with us on the last 2 songs of this set. And we're going to sing, I don't remember the first song, but we're going to sing How He Loves was the last song we were going to sing. And wouldn't it be so cool that when the choir's up there, we get to the end of the song, and we get to the last couple choruses, and we just kind of fade the music out, and then the band steps off the stage, and it's just the choir singing, kind of just reiterating, this isn't about the people performing, this is about worship, this is about God. And so we're super stoked, we're practicing for it, we get the choir in on it and stuff like that, and we get to that day, we play our first 3 songs, and then the speaker gets up to speak, and then we get up to play our last 2 songs, and the choir gets up with us, and we finally get to How He Loves, and it's such a powerful song. And as we're playing it, we got the choir behind us, and it was just, like, it's just worship. It's like, how He loves us, oh, how, and we're singing that, and just at the top of our lungs is a powerful, it's like it's supposed to be built around this powerful moment, and we finally get to the end, and we fade the music out, and we step off the stage, and the choir finishes it out, and then the speaker gets up and closes it out. And I remember as the service is ending, as we get off the stage, and I sit down as the speaker's praying, and as then the lights come up at the end, and I just remember sitting there, and I was so mad. And I was mad because I was like, why don't I feel what I feel like I should have felt? Like, why wasn't it so, emotionally, I get that it's not all about emotion, but why wasn't it more powerful? There's this intense moment. It was supposed to be all of this stuff. That's how I felt. My friend Josh comes off the stage, and my friend Josh is not a crier. He's just not. Our friend Anthony, who was also on the stage, he is. He's like, I was listening to a song on the car, they said the word love, and I wept. That's just him. But he was, a couple weeks ago, he was the one playing guitar. But yeah, that's just him. But my friend Josh is not like that. He comes off the stage, and he says, after we're talking later, he's like, yeah, I was moved to tears. That was so powerful. And here I am mad because I didn't feel anything. And here he is moved to tears. And then our friend Anthony, the weeper, the crier, comes off. He's like, yeah, I just felt eh. And so there's just 3 of us having experienced the same moment, experiencing completely different things. And we come off that stage, we have someone who's mad, someone who's like, eh, and someone who is moved to tears. And I just remember worship? What is this? What is this? And I would dare say that I see a problem in church. And it's this. I think we've unintentionally dumbed down worship to something that it's just simply not. When I was growing up, worship was used in reference to music, worship music. It was used in reference to church, worship services, right? Used in reference to your own personal, reading the Bible, so personal worship, or your family would get together and have worship in the evenings, the family worship. And as I've processed and thought through all of this, I've realized I don't even know if any of those things are really worship. And hear me out, that those aren't really the core of what worship is. They just aren't. When the 3 of us came off that stage after singing How He Loves, the 3 of us guys, we experienced 3 unique things. And yet we had one thing in common, and I think it's probably similar to something that we have in this room right now, where we all have different experiences with worship, and yet I think we all have maybe one thing in common, or many of us do, and it's that we don't know what worship is. What is it? If I asked you to define it, what is it? And so today I kind of want to do that. I want to define what worship is, and then talk about this truth that blew up my conception on it. And many of you know about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the one we just read, right? Many of you know that story. And it's a story with a fiery furnace. If you don't know it, that's okay. A lot of us who grew up in church heard this over and over and over again. But this story at its core is about worship. At its very core. And yet it says, I think, far more than most of us grew up hearing. And so we have to start with this backstory. And we read this, Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. I'm just going to be up on the screen here. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, people of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn and the flute and the zither and the lyre and the harps and the pipes and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And I want to explain something first. This guy Nebuchadnezzar, he's the king of the Babylonian Empire. It's the greatest empire that had ever come to exist up until that point. He's conquered most of the known world up until that time, and he had this specific strategy. What he would do is he would conquer a nation, he'd pretty much wipe out all the physical stuff, and then he'd take the people and he'd take them out of their land and resettle them near Babylon. Babylon is like modern-day Iraq. And he'd take them and settle them near there. And then he'd take some of their nobles and some of the young men, and he'd take them to the palace. And what he'd do is he'd feed them the best food, he'd give them the best wine, he'd throw the best parties, and he'd educate them with the best educators in Babylonian custom and language. And it's genius, really, because what he's doing is he's in essence trying to make these people Babylonian. In a couple generations, they won't even have any conception of their previous culture. And so he's making them Babylonian. But they're not there yet. And that's why it says in verse 4, you peoples of nations and languages, because it's just this conglomeration of people around him. And there's this reason they've all gathered together and why they're about to bow down to this golden statue of him. And it involves something that happened just before this in chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And in the dream, he sees this statue. And the statue is made out of 5 different materials. The head is gold. The torso area is silver, and then there's bronze, and then there's iron, and then there's iron and clay. And he can't figure out what in the world this dream means. And so, the long story short, this guy named Daniel ends up telling him the meaning of it. Daniel was friends with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were all Jewish. They had been part of God's chosen people in Israel. But these people had said, we want to go our own way, and they left the protection of God, and so this massive empire called Babylon just comes and takes them out. And they're all taken into exile, and Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego became these guys who, they were so wise because of how faithful they were to God and how God had blessed them, that they became higher and higher and higher in the Babylonian government. Well, Daniel, who has wisdom from God, interprets the dream, and that's what he says. He says, each one of those materials represents a kingdom. That golden head, that's your kingdom. That's Babylon. That's you, King Nebuchadnezzar. But then he has bad news. But the silver represents another kingdom that will come, and it will rise up and take away your kingdom. It will destroy your kingdom. And then the next materials all mean that another kingdom is going to come and take out the previous one. And Nebuchadnezzar is so incredibly glad to have the meaning of the dream explained to him that he's just so relieved. He gives Daniel the super high position, gives Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, makes them the governors of the main province of Babylon. But I know, even though the Bible doesn't say this, it's implied because of what happens next, that dream and the interpretation of it ate away at Nebuchadnezzar. Because think of this. Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest man on earth, and he had every reason to believe he was. Because the kingdom was the greatest that had ever come up into being to that point. He had subdued kingdoms. He had destroyed armies. He had made these massive building projects. He had built ziggurats, which are the pyramids, but they got steps in them in essence. They had built those. This is just one thing. In the wall of the cities of Babylon, they had a gate, and it was called the Ishtar Gate. And this gate was made out of blue brick. It's gorgeous. They reconstructed it at a museum in Berlin. I think it's in Berlin. And it's this beautiful blue, and then it's inlaid with golden animals like antelopes and lion. And you're just this craftsmanship is amazing. And that's just one of his gates. He's got hanging gardens and all this stuff. And I can just imagine that he knew this. He was the most important and powerful person on the earth at that point in time. And imagine how good that must have felt. When he gets up in the morning and he looks out his window, or he goes out in his palace just overlooking the city, he just sees physically this representation of how powerful and how mighty and how significant he is. But now he's got this dream that's telling him that someday everything that he's built is going to fall. And at some point he just says, you know what, enough. I know how powerful, I know how important I am. And so he commissions this massive statue to be built, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. And the difference, though, is that it's not made out of different materials. Instead of just a head of gold, the entire thing is gold. And he's making a statement, just pure and simple. My kingdom will never fall. My kingdom will last forever. I am far too important and I'm far too powerful to have built anything that would not last. And so he builds this statue, and it's a visible symbol of his power, of his importance, of his significance, because those things, his power, his importance, his significance, are of ultimate value to him. And that, right there, at its core, is what worship is. There's a guy named Tim Keller. He's a pastor. He's a Christian author. He defined worship like this. I love it. I've never found a better definition of worship, and it's this. Worship is, and you can write this down, worship is the act of ascribing ultimate value to something. Worship is the act of ascribing ultimate value to something. I'll say that one more time. Worship is the act of ascribing ultimate value to something. If you don't know what ascribe means, I'll help you out here. If you go to the mechanic because you don't know why your car broke down, he'd say, he gives you the reason that it did. Maybe he would ascribe your car breaking down to a bad radiator, right? Your radiator was the cause of your car breaking down. When we ascribe ultimate value to something, we say that this thing is ultimate value. Does that make sense? That this thing, something in there, I have decided, or I am assuming that it is the cause of ultimate value. It is ultimately valuable. And so Nebuchadnezzar here is ascribing ultimate value to being powerful, to being mighty, to being important. There is nothing greater. There is nothing higher. In fact, it is the most desirable thing. That is ultimate value to him. He's worshiping. And one of my default weaknesses, being vulnerable, one of my default weaknesses is worshiping, I think, my own intellect and my own understanding. I think there are times where I found myself reacting to people or things that people say with dismissiveness because, someone will be like, hey, I think the problem is this. And in my head, I'm like, no. And so I say like, well, I've thought about this. And what I'm really saying is, well, I've thought about this. And let me tell you what the actual problem is. And it comes from this place inside of me. There are times where I think I ascribe ultimate value to being right, to being the one who everyone looks at and is like, oh man, he's so wise. Wow. It makes me feel good about myself, right? It makes me feel like I matter. And doesn't that feel like ultimate value? Doesn't importance and being significant and being perceived as wise, like what's better than that? What could be more valuable in my life? And so I ascribe ultimate value to it. And you may notice that you ascribe ultimate value to being important or significant or mattering in other ways. In fact, a friend of mine, he was talking about his personality. He's like, I am incredibly self-sacrificing. He's like, at its best, it's like Jesus. But what it is normally, the vast majority, 99% of the time, it becomes this, where I am willing to take any pain. Like I will sit there and be like, oh, you can hurt me all the time and I'll forgive you. And I'll say like, man, yeah, we can try again and I'll take all the pain on my own back and I'll carry it on my own shoulders. And he's like, I like being a martyr because it makes me feel important. It makes me feel like people like, look at what a good person I am because here I am. You have wronged me so many times and look how many times I've forgiven you. Makes me feel good about myself. Because he's worshiping his own significance, but it comes out differently than mine. And so you may notice that you ascribe ultimate value to how spiritual you are, like you know more doctrine than those people over there. And doesn't it feel like ultimate value to be the one who is most correct in God's eyes? That's what's ultimately valuable. Not so much God, but being correct in his eyes and being better than everybody else. It's all just self-worship, where I ascribe ultimate value to myself. And the saddest part about this is a lot of us are walking around not even knowing this next thing, that we're at war. Because what happens is when I'm ascribing ultimate value to me, I am of ultimate value, and then you come into my space and you are ascribing ultimate value to yourself, guess what we have to do now? Who is of more value? Who is ultimately more valuable? Right? And so then we're actually at war with the people around us. Like, let me just say this, that social media has just shown this even more, where all we do is comparison. Man, their life is so much better than mine, but I want to be. That's why Jesus walks in on some of his disciples and they're like arguing about who's going to be the greatest in his kingdom. This God of mercy and love and self-sacrifice. And they're all arguing, well, who's going to be the highest? Because they are all saying, I am ultimately valuable. I am more ultimately valuable than you are, therefore I deserve a higher position than you do. Self-worship. And that's this first thing. We worship ourselves. We worship ourselves. You can write that down. That's our first point. We worship ourselves. We do. Self-worship. But look at this too, because we don't just worship ourselves. Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. And this is what it says. But some of the Chaldeans, some of your Bibles will say astrologers, but what it really means is Chaldeans is another word for Babylonians. Some of the Babylonian guys come to the king and they informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn and the flute and the zither and the lyre and the harps and the pipes and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." These guys come to Nebuchadnezzar and they're like, "Hey, some people aren't being loyal to you." But the funny part here is they're not coming to Nebuchadnezzar out of loyalty. They're not coming to him like, "We just love you so much that we would do anything for you." They're not doing that. They're showing up because of who they worship, who or what they worship. Here's the thing. What can Nebuchadnezzar give them? He'd give them wealth. He'd give them power. He'd give them status. In fact, if we inform on these guys and all of a sudden their positions come up vacant, who might be next in line for more power and more wealth and more status and more control? And they're there because of what they worship. We worship some things. We worship people or we worship things because we feel that they can give us something. These Babylonian guys have come because they believe that Nebuchadnezzar can give them something. So they're either worshiping him or they're worshiping the things that he can give them, and they're using him as the conduit to getting there. And we do the same thing. They've ascribed ultimate value to Nebuchadnezzar's approval of them because Nebuchadnezzar's approval of them could get them what they want. So we do the same thing. We worship. We ascribe ultimate value to other people's opinion of us because doesn't it feel great when we feel like people look on us favorably, right? We worship, we ascribe ultimate value to the high that comes from our phone buzzing or getting a notification because like, who could be thinking about me? We worship or we ascribe ultimate value to like the future, to happiness. If I could just get to that place, then I would be happy, right? If my life would just go this direction, then happiness would just naturally come to me. And so we start worshiping these things. We've often talked about worship like you either worship God or you don't worship God. You're either a worshiper or you're a heathen who doesn't worship God. That's not true. This is what's true. Here's the reality we live in. It's not a matter of if we worship. It's a matter of what we worship. It's not a matter of if we worship. It's a matter of what we worship. Today, like right now, in this moment, you are attributing ultimate value to a thing. And it may be comfort, it may be work, it may be your spouse's ability to complete you, it may be your ability to fix something like the plumbing under your sink or a person. It may be ascribing ultimate value to feeling all of the good stuff in life and avoiding all the pain. It may be a person, it may be the future, it may be distraction, but whatever it is, right now, you are ascribing ultimate value to something. You are saying that a thing in this world, in this life, or maybe it's God, is of ultimate value. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of what. And that's what is crazy about the Bible. The Bible is literally about this concept on nearly every page. And you can write this down. Every page of the Bible involves this question: who or what is ultimately valuable? Who or what? You can read the entire Bible and it's everywhere. Who or what is ultimately valuable? And in this case, these Babylonian guys come to Nebuchadnezzar and they're like, these things, him or the things that he could give us are ultimately valuable to us. That brings us to the second point. We worship people or we worship things. We worship people or things. And there's another person that we get to worship if we want to. It's Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. This is what it says. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my..." Stop there. What God will be able to rescue you from my power. Doesn't it feel like that sometimes? Like if we don't worship something in our life, that nothing else could rescue us from the desire. Like, I'll tell you this. I think I said this last couple weeks ago. Like, I noticed one day that I was so addicted to my phone that, like, I would be on it. I'd get up to go get ready for bed. I'd be playing a video or watching a video while I'm brushing my teeth. And then all the way to the bathroom, all the way to the bedroom, I'm, like, looking at my phone. I get in bed, put it on the charger, sit there, and use my phone to fall asleep. And let me tell you what was so scary to me about stopping that practice. How will I fall asleep? How will I ever be able to fall asleep if I don't have this? And all of a sudden you realize that there are other places in your life that you are saying, like, what God could ever save me from this? What God could help me if I didn't worship it? That's what Nebuchadnezzar is saying. What other God in this world could ever save you from me? Let's keep going. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, and I love this, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. We have no need to defend ourselves to you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then God whom we serve, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't," some of y'all need to be saying that right now in your life, but even if he doesn't come through, God, I would love it if you did this, but even if you don't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, we will never serve your gods and we'll never worship the gold statue you've set up. This moment, this choice by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is not out of emotion. They're not sitting there like, we would love to stand up to Nebuchadnezzar right now. This is not built out of knowledge. We know 28 beliefs. We know our 5 basics of Christianity. It's not built out of that. It's built out of worship. Because that day, and for a long time, all the days for a long time, they have been ascribing ultimate value not to God, or not to Nebuchadnezzar, not to other things, but to God. They've been doing it over and over and over consistently. Think about this. They were safe. They were comfortable. They had everything they could ever want in their homeland, and then they got pulled out of it. And they still said, we will not worship those things, we will worship God. When they come to this place where Nebuchadnezzar could give them wealth and status and position, guess what? He actually did do it. And now they have something to lose. We could lose our position. We could lose our lives. We could lose everything. But we still don't worship it. God is of ultimate value. They have transferred their ascription of ultimate value from gaining those things to simply God is of ultimate value. In their worship, they're saying, Nebuchadnezzar, what you can offer us is not of ultimate value because God is ultimate value. You can give us our lives. You can let us live, but God is life. You can let us have some peaceful existence, but God is peace. You may have power over us, but God has power over you. Our lives are held within His hands. So whatever He decides is good. Our stories are not over simply because you take our breath away. Our satisfaction is complete even if you strip everything from us. Because they have decided God is of ultimate value. Because ultimate value is not found in our safety. It's not found in our comfort. It's not found in our position. It's not found in our lives going the way that we want them to. Because God and everything that comes with Him is ultimate value. That's what they've decided that day and every day before then. God is of ultimate value. So if worship is when we ascribe ultimate value to a thing, then what is worshiping God? Worshiping God is when we transfer our ascription of value from the wrong thing to God. I love this because it means that you don't have to conjure up something you don't have. You ever leave a place and you're like, man, or you get to church and I don't feel like worshiping. I just don't feel it. Guess what? You don't have to feel it. Because that's not even worship. Worship, when we feel it, that's awesome. That's a great thing. Let's celebrate it. But sometimes it's just a matter of saying, God, I believe that this thing that I have decided has ultimate value doesn't have ultimate value, and I'm transferring my ascription of value from that thing to you. And that's what worship is at its very core. At its very core. It's not a matter of if you worship, it's a matter of what. You are either ascribing ultimate value to the wrong thing, or you're ascribing ultimate value to God. Those are your only two options. And the reason I say it's the wrong thing is what we're going to talk about next week. So if you got a problem with me saying that, then come back next week because we're going to talk about it. But those are your only two options. The main point of this entire sermon, if you want to walk away with anything, is this. It's not a question of if you worship, it's a question of what you worship. I said it earlier, I'm saying it again, driving it home. It's not a question of if you worship, it's a question of what you worship. And so the question is today, who or what are you worshiping? To what or to who are you ascribing ultimate value? We worship ourselves, we worship people or other things, or we can transfer our ascription of value from those things to God. Say, you are ultimately valuable. There's a slip of paper underneath your seat. And you can pick that up. There should be some pens or pencils around. It may not be enough for everyone, but you can share them. And what we're going to do right now is worship. Maybe you've noticed something. We haven't had any music, haven't had any songs today. That's on purpose. We didn't just forget. It's on purpose because worship is not music. Worship is not music. Worship is not simply reading your Bible. Worship is not a bunch of people talking about God. It's not what it is. Worship at its very core is what you are ascribing ultimate value to. And so what I want you to take the opportunity to do right now is to write down a thing or the thing that you are ascribing the thing that has ultimate value to you today. And if that's God, I am so grateful to hear that. And you can write that down. You don't have to be ashamed of that. But I want you to be honest. There's no use in not being honest. In fact, the only person you're not being honest with is you. God is like, I know what you're ascribing ultimate value to. You don't have to lie to me. So if you can think of that, if you're doing some self-reflection and you're ascribing ultimate value to something today, I want you to write it down. I want you to write it down. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually do two things. We're going to sing after this. We're going to pray. We're going to sing. And that singing is going to be us transferring our ascription of value from the thing that we've written down to God. When we praise God, when we say, Lord, you are so good, and when we say, I have decided to trust in Jesus, when we say, blessed be the name of the Lord, we are saying in that moment, God, you were of ultimate value, not this thing. And then I have one last thing that I'm just so stoked about, and this is this. After we sing, I'm going to come up and pray, and then you can leave after that. We're going to have potlucks. We're going to be setting up in here, but there's going to be a garbage can at the back. And on your way out, you can throw whatever you've been ascribing ultimate value to in the trash can. And this is why. Because what I believe has ultimate value to me right now, the thing that's controlling me, is of such little value compared to God. That's where it can go. Because God can fill me. God can give me peace. God can do anything that I need Him to do. And that thing can do nothing for me. So that's what we're going to do. I'm super excited about that. Like, just toss it away and say, God, no longer this, but you. And so take some time, write whatever you need to down. I'm going to pray over us. You can write it down. The music team's going to come up and we're going to sing. And then we're going to get to throw that out on our way out. Lord, impress upon us whatever it is that we are giving value more than you. If it's something in our lives that we have been doing for a long time, Lord, and we know it and we're ashamed of it, Lord, take away that shame and just allow us to honestly look and say, yes, this is what I'm giving ultimate value to. Lord, if it's something that's so deep inside of us that we're still struggling to figure it out, Lord, just give us the inkling, give us the words to begin to describe what it is, because, Lord, it is no good for us to just sit there worshiping things other than you. Lord, if it's something that we're afraid of, take away that fear, because you already know the deepest, darkest parts of our hearts, and you're not afraid of it. Lord, let us worship you today. Let us actually ascribe ultimate value to you and not these other things. Thank you for being so good to us and for being a God worthy of our worship. In your name, amen.
Could we all stand as we sing today? I'd like to start by singing this chorus just to call our attention to a different focus this morning.
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace.
Let's sing that again.
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace.
What I love about worship is that through worship, God promises not just to leave us where we started, He promises to breathe a new life into us, a new start. And so that's what we're going to sing about with this next song, that God is a God that when we value Him, when we worship Him, He breathes new life into us. Sing You Give Life.
You give life, You are love, You bring light to the darkness. You give hope, You restore every heart that is broken. Great are You, Lord. It's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to You only. You give life, You are love, You bring light to the darkness. You give hope, You restore every heart that is broken. Great are You, Lord. Great are You, Lord.
Let's sing All the Earth.
And all the earth will shout Your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are You, Lord.
Let's sing that one more time. All the earth.
And all the earth will shout Your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are You, Lord. It's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to You. Oh, it's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to You. Oh,
great thing about this worship that we do, that when we're ascribing ultimate value to God, God breathes a new life into us and he changes us, and so now we can say a different thing about who we are. We're not the mistakes that we've made before, we're who God says we are now.
Amen.
So now we're going to take a moment to sing this song just to declare that together as a church, that now we are who God says that we are. In my Father's house.
My Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. The sun sets free, always free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. My Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. The sun sets free, always free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
God, as we leave this place, we want you to be the ultimate value in our lives. And God, we've written stuff down that says we're placing value in this thing that isn't you. And Lord, as we throw it out, as we leave this place, leaving that thing where it belongs, and Lord, you rightly order the rest of our lives. You put us in the places that we need to be. You give us the hope and the joy and the peace that we've always desired. Because the other things in our lives could never give us that. And so Lord, let us leave this place glorifying you, believing what you say about us, because what you say about us is ultimately valuable to us and not the things that we say about ourselves. Let us leave this place knowing that you are fully and completely good, kind, loving, compassionate, and therefore, Lord, you are so valuable. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for the food, and the food we're about to eat, and the fellowship we're about to have. In your name, amen. Thank you, everyone. You can head out. There's a garbage can right there, and then you can start eating.